Happy November, happy eclipse season. We've just had a full moon and lunar eclipse in one night. Maybe you're one of the people who are more sensitive to those types of energies. We've got a lot of big things happening in the sky at this point in our lives, and more to come. But if you're not, that's okay too. I am your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. Today I want to talk about the overlap that exists between psychology and spirituality. Specifically, I want to talk about the correlation between chakras, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. The reason that this topic is important to me is coming up is I need to pause here before I continue. This episode needs to come with a huge trigger warning / content warning for discussion of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, and similar topics. Now, to continue, the reason that this topic is important to me is because at the end of 2017, November 26th, 2017, I was raped. And for the first time in my life, I paused. It was not the first time that I had been sexually abused. It was fortunately the last time, at least to this point in my life. But it was the first time that I took time to heal myself. In every previous abuse and violation and trauma that I endured, I buried myself. At different times, I buried myself in work. I buried myself in alcohol. I buried myself in overspending. I buried myself in other people, both from a social and sexual and romantic standpoint, and I never took time to let myself heal. And for the first time, I stopped and I said this was bad, and I need to feel that it was bad. It was the first time that I actually reported any of my abuse, and the police did nothing, and the investigator looked me in the eye and said that in cases like mine, it usually took 2 to 3 women reporting before they ever saw the inside of a courtroom. But for me not to worry that if he did it again, and it was within 7 years, my case could be used as evidence to convict him. And so I was left without justice and put in the position of either never receiving any justice, never seeing that happen, for him to be held accountable for his actions, or to wish that he would do it again, that some other woman would suffer what I had. And neither of those are good options. And what a terrible thing to tell someone who has been a victim of something so horrible. And I had people around me who I thought supported me, and it was a very big turning point in my life to where I learned who was really on my side and who wasn't. And a lot of people were telling me that I needed to be happy, that I needed to not let him win, that I needed to have the best life that I could have and be as happy as I could be, because otherwise he would win. And that mentality kept me going through the first sexual assault that I endured in my early 20s. But for this one, it hurt. And it hurt to hear it from other people, because the first time it was my idea. And This time it was not. I was told this is what you have to do. You have to be happy. You have to let it go. You have to move on. And very, very toxic, well-meaning, but toxic people in the church that I was going to at the time told me that I had to forgive him. And I struggled for years to try to forgive him. And there were times that I would reach that point of forgiveness and then lose it. And I finally just let myself grieve. Because that's what needs to happen when you've suffered a trauma. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it was a loss or a physical trauma or a sexual trauma or just a bad situation. You have to pause. You have to let yourself grieve. Because if you don't, that pain gets stored somewhere. In your mind, in your body, in your reactions. And for the first time in my life, I recognized that. And I knew that I needed to pause. And I reached a point of being able to draw boundaries. Someone at the church that I was going to stopped me one morning and asked how I was. And it was the first morning in a very long time that I didn't just want to die. And I said, I'm okay. And this very well-meaning gentleman said, okay, you should be more than okay. You're a child of God. You should be good. You should be great. And I put him in his place. And I've never been prouder of myself in my entire life than I was in that moment. And I said, how dare you? You have no idea what I've been through, or what I've been dealing with, the pain that I have been enduring every day, mentally and emotionally. I've been horrible every single day for over a month now. And for me to be okay is a huge improvement. And I was happy to tell you that today I'm okay, and you ruined that for me with your attitude and your judgment. And to his credit, he apologized. He said he was wrong. He said I had given him a lot to think about in how he responded to people. He didn't mean it badly. But we deal with people like that a lot, I think. People who want us to be something that we're not. Whether that's being happy when we're sad, being great when we're just okay, being a wife when we want to be a nurse, being a nurse when we want to be a mom, being whatever. You know, it's a constant struggle that we deal with in life. People wanting us to be something that we're not. And it is very important, while fulfilling your responsibilities, to recognize your own voice in the chaotic continuance of droning that happens. And to pay attention to that voice and follow it. So as I took this time to pause and I took this time to consider, I realized that I needed to allow myself to grieve. And I had a friend who was a master Reiki healer. She offered to come visit me. She knew that I was very depressed. I did not know at the time that she was a Reiki healer. And she came over to visit and we talked for a while. And as she was about to leave, she asked if she could do some Reiki on me and told me about her journey to become a Reiki practitioner. And I didn't really know much about it at the time. I had read a little bit, I was curious about it, and I trusted her, so I said, sure. At this point, I'll try anything. And at this point in my life, I had started reading Rachel Hollis's book, and I'm trying to remember which. It was the one that kind of got her started with the following. Girl, Wash Your Face. That's the name of it. I had started reading, Girl, Watch Your Face. And one of the things that really stood out to me in Girl, Wash Your Face that she talked about was how she processed some of the trauma that she had dealt with. She had a therapist tell her to schedule time every day to think about the bad thing. Then it doesn't become an intrusive thought. And I thought that seemed like a really good idea. So I picked the mornings. That way I wouldn't have to worry about it the rest of the day. And I would sit for about an hour in the mornings, and I would give myself time to think about what had happened. That I had been raped, and how awful it was, and that no one really helped me. And I would journal. And I was still a Christian at the time. I was still going to church. I would read the Bible, and I would read a book. I read a lot of self-help books and personal growth type books at the time that just spoke to me and kind of helped shift my perspective and helped me grow and helped me heal. And I would cry. I would give myself the morning to cry. And then I would go about my day. And when this friend performed the Reiki on me, and she told me afterwards that my chakras were completely unaligned. She said, you have a huge break between your solar plexus and your crown chakra. And I knew a little bit about chakras at the time because I have been doing yoga since I was 15 years old to help with a lot of the menstrual pain that I have. And you can't do yoga without being exposed to something about chakras. So she told me this, and I decided I was going to work on healing my chakras. That would be a part of my morning routine. And so I went to my local McKay's used bookstore, and I found this little box kit that was called Chakra Balancing by Anadia Judith. And it had a workbook and 2 audio CDs and chakra cards. And I thought that would be a really good place to start. And it was. It completely changed my view of a lot of things about life, a lot of things about myself, and honestly was one of the best tools for healing what I had been through that I came across. And I still use it to this day. I recommend it to a lot of people. If you can find it anywhere, I recommend getting that. Especially if you're dealing with any kind of trauma or any kind of difficult thing, if you're feeling ungrounded, if you're feeling outside of your power or outside of your intuition or anything related to energies that chakras deal with, I would recommend getting that kit. It has CDs that include guided meditations and yoga sequences, and the workbook is very helpful for working on finding where things need attention and healing. So I got this book, or kit rather, and I started working on it every morning, which, when I started talking about that, lost me a lot of friends and made me a lot of enemies. And everyone started accusing me of practicing witchcraft. Or allowing in devils or, all of the typical things that people who do not understand spiritual practices accuse you of. But as I started learning about the different chakras, and I was already well into my nursing career at this point, it struck me the correlation between quite a few of them and the different hierarchy of needs and stages of development. For example, the root chakra, it's at the base of your spine or in your feet, deals with feelings of safety, security, and belonging. Things to do with money, things to do with home, things to do with family and community. These are root chakra issues. If you grew up in an abusive home, a lot of people have problems with their root chakra. They never developed strong roots to understand that they belong here, they're safe here. And you look at the stages of development in infancy, which is 0 to 1 years old. Trust versus mistrust is the stage of development that Erikson, discovered was the main, he called it job, I think, of each stage. It's been a long time since I've studied this, but the stages of development that Erikson listed out, that each stage, there are 7 of them. Each stage of your age, you have a specific, quote, job that you're working on. And in infancy, it's trust versus mistrust, learning whether you can trust things in the world, whether you can trust your parents, whether you can trust that you'll be taken care of, whether you can trust you'll be safe, versus mistrust, learning that no one's there for you, no one's going to take care of you, no one's going to keep you safe. And each stage has a different, quote, job. It goes on into early childhood, autonomy versus shame and doubt, preschool, initiative versus guilt, and school age, industry versus inferiority, etc., up to maturity, which is ego integrity versus despair. And his theory on this was just that in each stage of life, there is a specific task, job, goal that the psyche needs to accomplish to move on to the next one. It goes from learning that you'll be okay, that you'll be taken care of, that you belong, up to the end, which is making peace with the life you had. And as I looked at the chakras and I looked at these stages of development, because the chakras are similar, they're stacked one upon another. If you don't have a strong root, then you can't create. If you can't create, then you don't have feelings of power. If you don't have strong roots and are able to create and have feelings of power, then it is very difficult for you to love from a pure heart. And then it goes on to speaking your truth, to seeing truth, knowing truth, and on top of that, an attachment to the higher power, the higher collective spirit. Whatever that means for you and your beliefs, the crown chakra represents that connection to universal power and to the world. And as I was learning about these and looking and noticing the similarities between these, and there's much more, in my opinion, similarities between the chakras and the stages of development, and not just because there's 7 of each. The hierarchy of needs that Maslow developed shows a similar pattern. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a system, a theory that was developed that is used a lot in modern Western healthcare, especially in the nursing field. His theory, he listed the hierarchy of needs as a pyramid. If you don't meet the first level, you're not going to move on to the levels above it. And the first level is physiological needs. This is things like food, water, shelter. And on top of the physiological needs, the next stage is safety. And then love and belonging on top of that. And then esteem, which is not just self-esteem, it's esteem in the world. You know, how other people view you. And then the top one is self-actualization, which is understanding your place in the world and that your life has meaning and purpose, which goes a lot into ego, integrity versus despair, the last stage of development in Erickson's theory, which goes into, did my life have meaning and purpose? It goes a lot with the crown chakra, which is, again, the connection into the world and the higher purpose. And it struck me as very interesting as I was learning more and more about chakras and working on healing myself, how there was so much correlation. And I started developing a theory that spirituality and psychology are the same study with different language. And I don't think that's 100% accurate. I didn't think it at the time. I don't think it now. I don't think it's a one-on-one correlation that they're exactly the same. But I think that there is a lot of overlap, and I think that there is a lot of similar ideas, and I think that both fields could benefit from listening to the other with an idea to learn rather than an idea of proving that they are better. And I found in my own healing that combining the two gave me a much better result than using either one in isolation. And this is why I bring this up, because I think there are a lot of people in the world that need healing. There are a lot of people who have been through really bad things. And I think, you know, where I live in America, in the rural South, the Bible Belt, especially, we live in a traumatized culture. It is within our culture to traumatize children, and it's accepted. It is within our culture to traumatize women, and it's accepted. It's within our culture to traumatize minorities, and it's accepted. And I think that the only way to heal our culture is to heal ourselves and spread that healing to others. And maybe that's wrong, but that is what I have tried to do, because I can't fix the world, but I can fix myself. And when I fix myself, maybe I can help someone else with their pain. And getting into my personal healing, it is not Instagram worthy. It's not salt baths and herbal teas and weekend getaways. That can be a part of it. But healing is so, so very messy. And I like to compare emotional healing, psychological healing to physical healing, because at my core, I will always be a trauma nurse. And whatever else I do in life, that is who I am. And working with trauma patients, people who have been in car wrecks or shot or had really bad falls or whatever, I notice the progression of healing stays the same. So some people need an intervention, they need surgery to help fix things. Not everyone does, but some people do. And I think some psychological trauma is like that too. Sometimes you need someone to come in immediately and help do something drastic to help change the course so that things heal properly. And people who need that and don't get it don't heal properly. They might eventually heal up, but they will never regain their function as it was before. Some things need help to heal properly. The other thing that I have noticed is that the body will always heal itself. It is always trying to survive. It is always trying to make itself right. And it needs very little help to do so. The important thing with healing, when there are wounds, when there is trauma, is to put the body in an environment where it can heal, to give it what it needs to heal. For example, a wound that is dirty will not heal or will not heal properly. You have to keep it clean. You can't keep putting bad things into an open wound. The other thing is that if you do not feed yourself nourishing food, your body doesn't have what it needs to heal the wound. You need protein. You need some carbohydrates. You need good vitamins and minerals and plenty of water. The psyche's like that too. If you keep putting bad things into it as it's trying to heal, it will become infected and the healing will be complicated. If you don't give yourself what you need just to survive, rest, peace, little joys, then your body won't have what it needs. Your mind won't have what it needs, to heal whatever you've been through. And it was a huge turning point for me when I started to think like that. When I started to recognize that I was responsible for my healing. It wasn't just something you shove down and get over. You have to actively take care of yourself. You have to actively heal. It will happen if you give yourself the environment needed to do so. And so after what I'd been through, I started looking specifically into sacral chakra healing, because while safety was a thing that was threatened, my root chakra certainly was out of balance. The amount of sexual trauma that I had been through prior to that had started to cause problems with my body. And I was in the early stages of getting to a diagnosis of endometriosis and PCOS, and eventually adenomyosis. Those diagnoses didn't come until over a year later, after about 16 years of dealing with symptoms. But everything was kind of coming to a head. And so I was looking at things that would support my sacral chakra. And I started attending women's circles. I stumbled upon a group on Facebook that was run by a woman who was starting women's sacred sister circles, she called them. And I found so much healing in doing that, in connecting with other women, especially as I had been isolated from other women, and in a big way taught to view other women as competition and enemies for most of my life. Being able to connect with them and heal together was a huge turning point for me. And the woman who ran these sister circles had this very specific one she did, and she didn't do it often. It was maybe once a year. She did a womb wisdom workshop. And in it, she talked about how our cycles, our menses, has been so shamed in our Western culture that it has caused dysfunction for a lot of women. And she got into ways to work with your cycle, particularly equating the menstrual cycle with the lunar cycle and how the phases line up and how the energy is similar and ways to work within that. And as I started paying attention to my own personal rhythms, I could see, as they were also reflected in the world, that I was part of something bigger. And it gave me feelings of power. And there is nothing more healing for someone who has been raped than feeling your own power again. And as I was going through this journey, I stumbled upon this book called Aphrodite's Daughters by Jalaja Bonheim, and I may have mispronounced her name, and I doubt she will ever hear this, but if you are, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name, because that book was one of the most instrumental books in my healing, and I recommend it for anyone, especially any woman who is working on healing anything around their sexuality, because it is nothing but story after story of women, and it is stories of childbirth and love and sex and women. And as I was continuing and healing, I continued this practice every morning of just sitting with my pain. I became very friendly with it because I realized that, like physical pain, emotional pain is a canary in the mine shaft. It tells you when something is wrong. It's there for a purpose. It's there for a reason. It demands to be paid attention to. And if you ignore it, you will miss a very important message. And so I learned to sit with my pain, to sit in the dark. And I found this story in Aphrodite's Daughters that spoke of the myth of Inanna, who I had not heard of before. Inanna is a Sumerian goddess. And her story is that she was a goddess of light and creation and spring and things green, everything that you would think of in the world. She was very powerful. And she decided to descend into the depths of the underworld to visit her sister, Ereshkigal. And it's a very interesting story because Ereshkigal is her and is also her sister. And as you read through this myth, it is obviously an allegory for facing your darkness and accepting your darkness and what you have to go through to accept your darkness. And if you've not heard of Inanna, I highly recommend looking her up, especially if you are going through a healing journey. She is one of my favorite goddesses. She feels like a friend when I see her or hear of her now. But Inanna's power comes from the fact that she gave up everything to die. And as she died, she found her power again. She resurrects herself and comes back kind of as a Persephone-like goddess. She predates Persephone, and I think Persephone's myth is based on her. But she comes back as goddess of everything, the underworld, life, creation, and what more is there, really, than life and death? As I learned about this goddess, and I was going to these sister circles and meeting women who thought very differently than me, and some who thought similarly to me, and expanding my knowledge, it became very clear to me that a big part of my healing was going to involve embracing my sexuality and allowing myself to be a sexual being. And with some exceptions, as humans, we are all sexual beings. That is how we're designed, is to create. And whether that is the creation of another human life or the creation of art, creation of buildings or food or a home or whatever, we are designed for creation in a way that other species do not mimic. And the energy of sex, that vibe, if you will, is the exact same as the energy that you use to write a book or paint a picture or create a dinner or make a home. And while some people have a tendency towards one or the other or any specific type of creation, sexual energy is creation energy. And to deny that we are sexual beings is to deny a huge part of who we are. And growing up in the evangelical church, you can imagine how much I had to deny that I was a sexual being. And accepting that I was, and allowing myself to have the drive that I had and not shame myself for it, to have the desires that I had and witness them without shame. It was honestly one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, to just accept myself as I was. And it was the most healing thing that I did. I would like to leave you with a daily exercise that you can do for chakra balancing, if you would like. And they're all questions that you can ask yourself. In what areas of my life do I feel safe, secure, connected, belonging? What am I creating? Or how do I create? What do I have control or power over? How do I give and receive love? Or who do I give love to or receive love from? What truth of mine is calling to be expressed? What truth in the world do I see? How can I better honor my intuition? How am I connected to the world, the universe, spirit, God, whatever word feels comfortable for you to use? How does my spirituality look in my life? What part of it needs attention? These are just questions you can ask yourself daily if you so choose to check in with yourself and your chakras, your energy centers, and see where you are and what might need attention. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope you will join me for the next episode and continue to work with me on our mosaic in progress.